Hey all, welcome to our new edition of our Web3 learning journey. I know a couple of folks are still joining, but we can start. Nice seeing you all. And we are having Daniel Hwang today with us to talk about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Daniel has a deep history in all things Web3. Daniel, let me just read out here. You are the special project leads at F2 Pool. You are the head of protocols at Stakefish, which is the leading proof of stake validator. You're the founding organizer of DAO. You lead a blockchain carbon offset working group. You're helping artists in the Web3 space. So thank you for coming today and for sharing your wisdom with us. We also know that you have an airplane to catch, so we're gonna try and wrap this up by 12:40, and so you can catch your plane. And let's get started right away. I think in terms of the arc that we've done here, on the learning journey, we looked at the propensities of blockchain to help formalize ownership and to level the playing field for small farmers, for instance. We looked at the opportunities of coins to help communities make decisions and capture value. And now we are going to this mysterious DAO thing that a lot of folks have talked about. Are you going to start a DAO or are you not going to start a DAO? And we are happy to have an expert here that can help us understand more deeply what a DAO is. And perhaps that's a great segue into my first question to you, Daniel. I've heard different answers. Like sometimes when you ask someone who's more techie, what's a DAO? The answer tends to be, oh, that's a company as software. And when you ask someone who comes more from the social sector side, what's a DAO? They say, oh, it's a new organization that helps us come together and make decisions in a better way. And what would you say what a DAO is? Is it both? Is it nothing of that? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I would. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. And thank you for welcoming me here. I would say that DAOs are an incentivized coordination tool for communities. If that's like the one sentence that we could use.
What would you say?
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry.
An incentivized coordination tool for communities.
Expand on that.
So there's this. So for one, like the DAO itself is more of like this. Let's say this structure or framework that communities can use to incentivize the type of behavior that they want, or let's say the goal of the community, if it's investment focused, or if it's more social goods or public goods focused. And I think the incentivization part comes from how you're able to wrangle anonymous individuals across the planet to consolidate into decisions that make sense. Some would even say like there's a sort of game theoretic part to using tokens to get behavior or certain desired behaviors to come from these. But then there's also, I've seen DAOs attempt structures that don't even have tokens or even allow the trading of tokens. And for context, that maybe had come from Vitalik, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, had recently introduced this concept called like soul-bound tokens. Basically means like non-transferable tokens, which basically boils down to decentralized identity, which, if you keep going down the rabbit hole, goes down into sort of civil resistance or making sure that you are who you are, which goes down into a lot of like sort of self-sovereignty concepts. But if you come back up that rabbit hole, you have it's incentivization of particular behaviors that a community does want, that does preserve anonymity, self-sovereignty, and community sort of decision making.
And it's all sort of, if we were to convey, let's say, to my imaginary grandmother, the sort of key elements of a DAO, what would you explain? How would you explain that? What does that contain? It's all a technology-based organization, right? To start off with, very simply. It's based on contracts. Can you say a few of these things, building blocks?
Yeah. So it's tooling where it matters. So like tooling is an important kind of connection that people can have when they want to guarantee certain things are sort of written on, right, as blockchains are these supposed immutable ledgers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that sort of proof, and I would say even a social contract in that community that is reflected through sort of an autonomous piece of code that people come to an agreement on. And that piece of code is going to run in perpetuity based on the decisions that gave rise to it. And these are just like rules of like, if you do X, Y will happen. And that's usually how people think of things. And there obviously is quite a spectrum of how DAO tooling is deployed, from the type of sort of manifestation that the community wants to have when they try to embark on their sort of DAO journey or launching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's say a group of people with a shared mission wants to come together. They agree to form an organization and a form of a DAO. So it has, no typical hierarchical leadership. They can offload certain things that they agree on via smart contracts that run automated in the background. So supposedly a lot of, manual labor gets sorted out that way. And then how would you, what is really interesting, I think, for us here from the citizen sector is sort of, does this really allow for new form of governance models? Or how, perhaps more abstractly spoken, how do you rule or balance this out between, you have the machine that's, or the software that's taking part of these smart contracts, if X, then Y. And then you have human intelligence. And how can human intelligence and these smart contracts interact, and in what way? For instance, if you figure out we don't want Y anymore, we want Z or we want A, how can you adapt this? How does that work? What are the different forms of models that you see?
Yeah, that sort of connection, let's say like the human element and how we choose to interact with the blockchain. At the end of the day, we were talking about this right before the call started, right? Like it's inherently political. There's code that we can deploy that we think is great. And then it will live forever as long as all the infrastructure service providers continue to run it and support it. But then if we want it changed, we can change it. We have like these sort of principles of decentralization, self-sovereignty, censorship resistance, immutability. But immutability is sort of, it's tamperable if there really is a desire to tamper with it, because it's going to be eventually humans that get to make those decisions on what code that they want to run. And especially in the context of DAOs, where you have this ability to vote on chain, you do run into a lot of interesting scenarios where some frameworks make sense and some don't. And so I can talk briefly about maybe the two broader, the two types of DAOs that I think you can kind of separate most things into. Where
that would be great if you could give some examples. Yeah.
Investment DAOs and social DAOs. And the umbrella here is, let's say, tokens that individuals in these DAOs can have that represent their sort of voting power in decision making. So investment DAOs are quite similar, quite simple, where there's a collection of folks that want to pool money together for a particular, let's say, right, investment. Let's say investment endeavor. They don't need to know each other. They don't need to know who particular leaders are. There's obviously that place of trust that you have to make when you are anonymous people on the internet that have certain goals that you think can kind of match together. Pull money together, and let's say $1 equals 1 token for that investment DAO. So that investment DAO has a token. And if you put in $2, you get 2 tokens or what have you. So then you have this sort of representation 1-for-1 for each dollar you put in, which is going to show how powerful your voice can be. If you contribute over 30% of the entire treasury that's been pooled, then you should have that level of say, as directly scaling that way. And that's simple, right? Something you put in, something you get out. And then the tooling that you were mentioning earlier is there to make sure that people can't just up and leave with the money, right? It's all very transparent there. There's the rules that the community comes together on to determine how the funds are stored, if they're locked in a vault, or if they're locked in a sort of a smart contract, or they're locked in someone's wallet, right? There's a spectrum of how decentralized the management of that money can be. And then there's rules that the communities can put in place of, do we have to have a quorum when we do voting to determine where we start to invest the money or deploy the money into. And then, there's this concept that's very popular among investment DAOs called rage quitting, where a lot of these investment DAOs implement this type of power of exit at any time, where if you put in $3, you can leave with $3 at any time from the beginning of the DAO to the end, which allows you to sort of have that safety. And that rage quitting concept is quite important, especially in investment DAOs where there's significant capital that you potentially can contribute and benefit from the activities of that the community. Is that a lot of times these investment DAOs, when they are more on the decentralized side of the spectrum, are filled with anonymous people, and these anonymous people can be malicious, or they can be altruistic, let's say, or nice people who are not going to sort of screw you over. But having that power, right, especially in this sort of trustless system that we want the blockchain to operate on, requires that sort of power of exit, right? Because if you're in a trustless system, you have to be you have to have the ability to be always maintain or retain self-sovereignty over your own funds that you contribute to that. And
Daniel,
the self-sovereignty.
a question. One of the things that I hear you say, sort of like autonomy, self-sovereignty, and it in many ways feels like it's a summation of individuals versus a collective. And I wonder if the idea of collectivity, of either people or that you're in a community with, it's just too early in the lifetime of a DAO, or is it inconsistent with the very notion of a DAO? And I'd be curious what you think of that.
Is your question asking what the difference between summation or?
No, I'm saying like what you're saying about sort of DAOs right now in 2022 is it's really important to be incentivizing this coordinated activity, but either is intended for anonymity and self-sovereignty, which is very different from ideas about solidarity and and collectivity. And I wonder, is it that at the core of the model of DAOs is this idea of anonymity, self-sovereignty, or is that just the moment that we're in and we just haven't had the imagination or experience yet to be seeing other applications?
That I would say is maybe one location on the spectrum of decentralization. If you have like this sort of this line with a spectrum, and then there are particular points in time where you can have pure decentralization, but you will not have, let's say, civil resistance of understanding if 5 of these anonymous people are actually 5 individual people or one person pretending to be 5, where you have on the other side more centralization where every single person who's part of this, quote unquote DAO is KYC'd and doxed and you know exactly who they are. Then there's more, there's the ability to have civil resistance. And maybe I can answer your question, Sarah, where anonymity is required and important. I think that comes down to the principle of self-sovereignty. And we've seen this, I've talked about this in theory at length before in other presentations I've done, sort of this kind of like sky is falling presentation, and we've also seen this happen in real life, unfortunately because it happened, fortunately because it's now like a really great like example of something that happened and people will take it seriously now. Well, where self-sovereignty is supposed to it dictates that it means that you can do whatever the hell you want with your money, right? If it's your money, you can do whatever you want with it in this context. If you're not anonymous and you have the full history of your financial transactions and how much you hold in your particular account, let's say I have a particular account and I have like however many dollars in it, and people know that account belongs to me, I may not be able to have full self-sovereignty, even though the system theoretically allows for it. And what I mean by that is we've seen in extreme cases, entire communities literally change the state of the blockchain to prevent particular account holders to move money. And there was a case quite a few weeks ago on this blockchain called Juno, where over at its peak, $125 million was confiscated from a Japanese syndicate because the community was able to, by direct majority, implement a governance proposal that would violate self-sovereignty. So if, for example, there were particular individuals that were quite controversial, and their account information was anonymous, they would not have had to deal with that type of scrutiny, distrust, and community-wide confiscation, which violates self-sovereignty. So that's why I think that principle that we see in sort of this, in the blockchain and very deeply incentivized blockchain world, where everything is PvP, player versus player, dark forest territory, where if you're found out, it's very scary for you because you can be attacked then. That's why self-sovereignty is, you need anonymity with that. The thing is, you have like these sort of contradictions inherently where self-sovereignty, which requires anonymity, prevents sometimes civil resistance, where civil resistance is,
Yeah, Daniel, so it's fascinating. We yourself also getting far out into the libertarian,
Yeah, it's
field.
very
It sounds like, and I want to let's park that for a moment. And so, because at the beginning you said you started saying, okay, there are different DAOs, there are investment DAOs, and then there are the social DAOs. And I would like to ask you to get back to the social DAO proposition, especially because we were so out in the individualized self-sovereignty. So how does the social DAO come in?
Social
and then
DAO,
a follow-up question would be, can you combine the two?
we've tried to combine them at Hondao, and it was very difficult, and maybe even impossible.
So
So
what's the
social
social DAO? Let's start first.
Yeah, so social, with what I would personally say, my interpretation of what social DAOs are is that you don't have this sort of tit for tat token incentivization model. And what I mean by that is social DAOs usually don't have investment sort of purposes. Let's say it's like public goods for like climate action or something. And a group of people get together and they're all, this community that wants to rely on, these tools, these like DAOs, which are used as coordination tools to be able to organize in a trustless manner, across the planet and make certain decisions a little easier if it's not hampered by, let's say, traditional decision making, let's say. Yeah. And the social DAOs have this, I would say, anti-investment DAO, let's say, ethos, where the investment DAOs I mentioned have the ability for this immediate rage quit because there's a clear one-to-one. The number of tokens I hold in the investment DAO represent the amount of capital that I've put in, and I can leave at any time. It's a very agnostic relationship. It's just capital. The thing with social DAOs is that when you have these communities and you want to determine how tokens, let's say, are distributed among its community members, it usually has to come because you're not putting usually capital in it. There can be capital put in, but the token distribution that happens in social DAOs comes from community contributions, and those community contributions usually reflect the extent to how much you have contributed. So if you've contributed a lot to the community, let's say like tweeted about it, written blog posts about it, helped set up the tooling and infrastructure, you'll get rewarded more tokens. And the more tokens that you are rewarded with in that context give you sort of proof of your ability, the proof of your contribution amount, which shows that you've done a lot more for the community, which then shows that you should, which then means that you can have a larger governance say in that. The problem with social DAOs versus investment DAOs, or social DAOs using investment DAO frameworks, is that, and I mentioned this briefly about like soul-bound tokens or non-transferable tokens. The immediate moment that you allow social DAO tokens that are held by contributors who have amassed them because of their contributions, the moment that you allow those to be transferable or sold on an open market, you break this system. Because let's say Constance, you contributed, like, let's say there's like a list of things that you could do for a community that the community came up with. And right, one is like tweeting, writing a blog. Maybe you get 1 token for tweeting. Maybe you get 1 token for attending meetings. Maybe you get 3 tokens for writing a blog, et cetera, et cetera. And you complete the entire list of all those things that people have agreed upon. If you do these things, you'll get tokens that represent now your governance power. If you do more of them, you probably should have more governance power because you've contributed that amount. If you're able to transfer those tokens that you receive from your contributions to someone else, or you can sell it, that means that maybe like an asshole, some out there who has a lot of money and wants to be able to say, hey, Constance, like, sell me your tokens, sell me all your tokens. And then now they just have this cap money that they gave you, and then they can, LARP or pretend, right? Just because their account now has all those tokens, they can say, hey, I've done all of this for the community, and now I can have governance decisions, even though I have not contributed anything. Except
what are some of the best DAOs or social DAOs you've sent out there, and why? And as I give you 10 seconds to think about that, everyone, we are moving seamlessly into Q&A also. So if you have any specific questions or so, think about them. You can put them in the chat or raise your hands. Daniel, back to you.
Yeah, a good one is what I've seen is this project called Govern, GOVRN, has put together. So it is, there's a guy named Aaron Soskin who comes from, right, the Glenn Wheel, the economists camp of quadratic land management. And I think I think he created this community called Radical Exchange. And they've been doing a lot of really interesting work with tooling that supports social DAOs, how social DAOs can implement this token-based token rewards for contributions and allowing these not to be transferable. I didn't answer your question directly. There's a lot of DAOs that do attempt to follow that path. DAO is one of them, after we found that it's so difficult to marry both an investment side of things with the same token to social DAOs. And so we've been retrofitting the way that we kind of allow the community to contribute and participate with non-transferable tokens.
Here is a question from Laura from Argentina. How can organizations plan their transition to a DAO model, and what tools do you think are powerful that DAOs can offer to social organizations?
Yeah, I can start from the bottom up. The actual tools that can exist, it's basically what you need to use to interact with the blockchain individually. So you need a wallet that is able to hold a token that the DAO has, and then an ability to deploy that token into a on-chain governance sort of system. We've seen custom ways of on-chain voting, where if you have a token in a wallet, this interface will read that, and then you can post up a proposal saying yes or no, and then people vote on that. A popular tool that a lot of people use in the Ethereum ecosystem is called Snapshot, where any community can kind of say, hey, here's my smart contract that reflects the tokens that I use. You can integrate it into the Snapshot webpage, and you can start putting out proposals, right, based on who the moderators or admins will be. It's basically that. You need a communication forum, wallet to interact with a blockchain, and an interface to expose governance proposals that people can vote on if they have a wallet with your token that is associated with your DAO.
There is a question here, and Sarah, I saw you lowering your hand, so I'm assuming this is the question that brings in what you wanted to say. I read it out from Andy. Hearing all the emphasis on anonymity and self-sovereignty, is there a fundamental disconnect between DAOs and the co-op model? Some articles posit a link between these, but I'm not sure about it in practice.
Yeah, in practice is, I think, the key word. Technically, there's quite a lot of differences. Obviously, technically, as the word says, but also how the reality pans out. I've been saying blockchains are inherently political, and if there is politics, there is oftentimes sort of a consolidation of power among particular individuals. As much as we'd like to say, decentralization can benefit from pure democracy or direct democracy, we know that never has that been able to scale. And so even in a completely decentralized or anonymous environment, there are always going to be people who make their voice heard louder than others. And right, just the psychology of not wanting to have do your own thinking sometimes, and then you just follow the leader. or if you have like these sort of Pied Pipers that go around, or influencers or demagogues, it just ends up becoming sometimes like this, right? Yeah, consolidation of power among particular individuals. And what's scary about that is, direct democracies are very scary, because that can turn into mob rule. And we've actually seen that happen. So,
one of the things that I have started seeing in the social DAO space is really starting to think about organizational efficiency, which seems like that might be an oxymoron, but I actually feel like sometimes we're overthinking like the whole, like we on the social sector, like we prize the idea of like deliberation, people learning how to work together. I love the idea of solidarity because you don't have to like everybody. You don't even have to agree, but you're in a joint activity together. And so I think, though, weirdly, the promise of the DAO is not for the core activities of the social sector, but the repeatable, boring things that don't require that much discretion. But I think because they're boring and repeatable, they're not what gets ink, but I think there's something to that, you know what I mean? Like there's certain processes that, social sector can make much more efficient, of easy entrance, easy exit, for certain things. So I'd be curious, sort of, does that resonate at all, or does that sound like, wrong,
It does. And I've heard that said quite a lot. I had a conversation with Suman yesterday, and we were just talking a bit about that. Some of those features that you had just described, I think when we sometimes follow that path to its end, is often just like there's no regulatory like oversight. That's why it makes it easier. So like, right, regulations kind of, I would say, with like how certain people interact with organizations or something, like block put up very necessary barriers to protect people. Ease of access to these things that can be automated. In what you're saying, I think you briefly mentioned a few examples of like exiting, entering, understanding how you can interact with organizations or capital formation is, there's regulations around that, that can happen. So, that's why sometimes you get to that.
Yeah. I have a question around the role of trust, which is a little bit in line with what Andy was asking. Sort of, for the social sector, trust often comes because you're not anonymous. We know you, we've interacted in community, or we've been vetted by a similar process. We are shareholder of the same trusted organization, or, so, and in, the extreme DAO case, trust comes because a software clears you, on both ends. So would you say a DAO is actually, if pressed, would you recommend this as a tool for social sector organization at all? Or would you say,
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful concepts, not just of DAOs, but of blockchain in general, is what Sarah was saying. You have like a lot of things that can be automated. And what's powerful is that you can literally have, let's say, you've built, let's say, this empty spaceship that you have now allowed that is like indestructible. Let's say this empty spaceship is indestructible. You built the scaffolding, everything has engines and everything, and all it requires are people to man that spaceship and direct it to wherever it can go, and people can populate this spaceship, because the spaceship will always live on for eternity, or let's say the universe is a blockchain, as long as the blockchain survives. And people can completely abandon that spaceship, and it will just remain there. It's there for anyone to use. and that can live on regardless of the type of people that interact or board that spaceship and man it.
Mm.
It can be used in good ways, it can be used in bad ways, but it's always going to be there, and nothing can stop it from like not existing or being destroyed or being used to its full potential. So I think that's something that's powerful, like the immutability, or let's say supposed immutability of these autonomous code.
Yeah.
That is it's always going to be there, and anyone can interact with it. Anyone can see what's inside. Let's say it's a glass spaceship, indestructible glass spaceship that everyone can see how it operates and what's going on inside, and anyone's allowed to man it and commandeer it or abandon it.
I know we're coming to the end of the time because you have to run and get your flight. So I'm asking, there are more questions here in the chat that are really interesting. Can you give an example of a social DAO that is making real progress on an important problem in the US?
Yeah, so the climate space has found a lot of use for using DAO systems. This is, I would say, they've mixed a bit of the investment DAO and social DAO concept. I'm not saying that social DAOs that have transferable tokens is a bad thing. It's kind of more difficult to use, but yeah, it's so easy to raise and aggregate capital and deploy it immediately to public goods causes. And so that has been incredible. I think that, yes, there's this renewed excitement for how people can organize to support climate positive initiatives.
Thank you, Daniel. And then there's one more, I think it's going to be the last one. Do you think the tokenization component of DAO poses a risk of displacing other incentives for people to participate in communities?
So maybe that's referring to the amount of capital you can contribute and the tokens that you get back from that. Is that?
It's probably sort of does everything. Yeah, it's everything economized, so because you get a token, you do that rather than being intrinsically motivated or for other reasons.
Yeah, that intrinsic motivation is quite interesting. And that's why I had mentioned or said like PvP, right? Dark forest. Good behavior. I think a lot of crypto can be summed up into sort of that good behavior is incentivized. Good behavior can't robustly rely on altruism. As much as we'd love the world to be like that, even Bitcoin miners, I was a Bitcoin miner many like a long time ago, and I did it for obviously ideological reasons. But today at scale, Bitcoin miners don't give a crap about decentralization. They don't care about self-sovereignty or censorship resistance or immutability. We had designed, the Bitcoin system had been designed in such a way where you can have profit maximalism be the primary goal of a mining operation. And the side effects of their participation is the decentralization, self-sovereignty, and censorship resistance that we all benefit from. And it's right. It's their very clear profit maximization efforts result directly in the system running as it was intended. Yeah, so incentivization, good behavior is incentivized.
Thank you so much, Daniel. We have to come to an end. I think we could go on into, the philosophical, the dark aspects and the positive aspects. That was fascinating. Thank you for giving us your time, and now rush to the airport and get that flight that I think is leaving in half hour.
Yeah, it's nice. I can talk much more. Definitely open to coming again and just having long AMAs.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll get back to you on that one.
Thank you
so much. And thank you everyone for joining.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.